talk we discussed the poet Attar and tried to see from his allegorical poem, The Conference of the Birds, how poetry became infused with the inner life, and how it was used by the great masters in order to make the inner journey more from both a sensory as well as a spiritual point to the tzaddik, to the adept. Now, most of the great, if not all of the great poets of the inner way, of Tassawuf, have been associated in the mind of most, as well as in the mind of the lay audience, being mainly Persian or Turkish or Urdu, and to a very large extent the universe of the poetry of Tassawuf, with one or two notable exceptions, has always been associated with the non-Arabic speaking world. And this really also dovetails into the generally understood notion, or the generally held notion, that Tassawuf in its organizational and its literary or cultural manifestations a very powerful and prominent force in the Eastern Islamic world. Now, it is true that there were established very powerful and strong tariqas in the Arabic-speaking part, that is the Western part of the Islamic world. But until very recently, I would have thought, for the non-Arabic speaker, it was very, very difficult to try to identify a poet of the inner way who was an Arab. I mean, some poets who came from Greater Khorasan wrote in Arabic, but nevertheless there has been an association in the minds of most people with talks about the poets of Tassawuf. Immediately people like Rumi come to mind, or Hafa, or Jami, or Attar, and these are one way or the other part of the cultural universe of the Persian and Turkish and the Urdu-speaking world. However, I believe, and this is not being parochial or being partial, probably the greatest insights into the inner way from a poetic perspective was given by a man called Ibn al-Farah. He's, in my mind, his poetry, especially one of his poems called Ta'i al-Kubra. I'll explain that later, inshallah. It's probably the greatest mystic who's also a poet. Now, I do not want to compare him to Rumi, and one of the reasons why I decided not to talk about Rumi today, because Rumi is accessible to a lot of the English-speaking world. His verse has been translated into English, and I was told that it's probably one of the best-selling books now in the United States, apparently, extracts from Rumi. So he's blended into the modern world, not necessarily from the door or from the gateway of increasing people's inner knowledge, but it's taken as aphorisms and anecdotes and stories, and to some extent has seeped into the modern mind. But on the other hand, it is much more cryptic, in the sense that his poetry really deals with the relationship of the self to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the of the self in a way that is truly profound. He was a contemporary of the great Ibn Arabi, but it is quite unlikely that they ever met. So it is that much more of a profound poet, in the sense that his whole structure of his gnostic states were really those of Ibn Arabi, of the system of Ibn Arabi, without him actually meeting him. So it is really quite extraordinary that the stages that he describes and the visions that he had are such that they correspond to a very large extent with the structure, the whole Gnostic structure of the great Ibn Arabi. One of the reasons why Arabic has not been associated in the mind of seekers and the mind of the adepts with the mystical language of poetry is because of the structure of Arabic poetry. The structure of Arabic poetry is basically defined by two forms. One of them is called ghazal, which is basically a love lyric. And the other one is the qasida. And the qasida primarily is for praising, while the love lyric describes generally the relationship between the speaker, the poet, the seer, and certain object of desire. And it's associated to a very large extent with the poetry of the pre-Islamic Arabs. So the structure of Arabic poetry, until very recently, was defined by these two modes. And these two modes do not lend themselves easily to expressions of mystical insights and expressions of spiritual states. And because of that, the form in which Sufi poetry evolved was mainly in the form associated with the structures of Persian and Turkish, but mainly Persian, which is the Mathnawi form, the couplet form, or the Rubaiyat form. The poems of Ibn Farid are to some extent modified versions of the structure of Persian, but written in the style of the Arabic ghazal, or the Arabic love lyric. And he was the first one who was able to transpose the physical objects of love and desire, which were the primary impulses behind the Jahiliyyah poets, into the poetry associated with the inner way. He also was born in, I think, 1180, and he was a contemporary with the great Salah ad-Din, who brought down the Fatimid or the Shiite dynasty in Egypt and replaced it with a form of Sunni orthodoxy tinged with the love of Ahlul Bayt, which became the hallmark, really, of Egyptian Islam ever since. And in that period was basically the displacement of the fiqh, or the jurisprudence, of the Fatimids, who are Ismaili Shiites, with that of the main Sunni. Who changed the madrasas from one, or the schools from one form of belief to another. And there was a great amount of energy and effort promoted by Salah ad-Din and his successors in Egypt to change the landscape, the spiritual landscape and the religious landscape of the country. And there was at that time a very large program of construction of schools that taught the Sunni ways, the madhabs of Ahl Jama'ah, and there was great encouragement also of shuyukh of the Sufi orders to switch their allegiance from the former Fatimid rulers of Egypt to the new system, to the new order. So the first khanaqas, or the first meeting halls of the Sufi orders were established in Egypt at that time. So the background to Ibn Farid was really a background of change from one form of religious expression of the state to another, and it was associated also with a great program of public works built around the strengthening of the Sunni orthodoxy in Cairo, as well as strengthening the Sufi orders. But he himself, I don't think, came under the spell of that. His father was a Farid. In Arabic, a Farid means a notary public, who was an immigrant to Egypt from Hama, which is a town in Syria. His father was also a person of the inner way, and when he reached the height of his work, he was offered the post of being the judge of all the judges in Egypt, which he declined and went into permanent retirement in a corner in the Azhar, the famous Azhar Mosque in Egypt. So his son, Umar ibn Farid, Abu Qasim Umar ibn Farid, was raised under that kind of environment. From a very early age, we are told by his biographer, who is actually his grandson, who wrote a long introduction to his diwan, which is his collection of poems. His diwan is quite small, It's one of the smallest diwans of all the major Arab poets. There's about 30 poems, of which 2 of them are the most noteworthy, and the most famous one is the Ta'iyya al-Kubra, or the greater poem ending in T. All the verses, and there are 761 verses, end with the letter T. From the early age, as I said, he used to go on extended visits and trips into the valleys and hills surrounding Cairo. There's an area called Muqatta. Anybody's been to Cairo. You see that Cairo is, of course, built along the Nile, but about 10 miles outside of the main town itself, the main city itself, a range of hills emerge. And there have always been places of hiding for all kinds of people who are outlaws, outcasts. And even now, it has a certain aura of mystery and gloom about it. I went there about 15 years ago. He used to go there for days on end. Basically, in what was known then as siyaha. Siyaha means, now it means, if you ask an Arab what siyaha means, it means tourism. But in reality, siyaha means seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while journeying away from your common points of reference. So he used to go on these constant siyahas into Jabal Muqatta, trying to achieve a certain sense and opening for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he could achieve that. But he kept on trying. And he of course was then being raised in the profession of his father to become a notary, and he became part and parcel of being a notary those days was also to be knowledgeable about the outer methods of the deen and the outer rules and strictures of the deen. One day he was going to his usual mosque when he saw an old man who was a grocer apparently doing his wudu in a very, very strange way. And apparently he was washing his face and washing his hands and washing his feet and re-washing his face and doing it completely in a roundabout, upside down way. And he went up to him and asked him, I'm now doing a wudu in the courtyard of this famous mosque with all these fuqahas around you, all these ulamas around you. Why are you doing it in this strange way? And apparently this person, who is then known to him afterwards as the wali of his time, as a qutb, that's the pole of his age, turned around to Ibn Farid and told him, you will not achieve your practical opening. At that point in time, Ibn Farid, as his biographer recites, recognized that he was talking to the wali of his there for 15 years, not in Mecca itself, but in the various valleys and the various deserts surrounding Mecca, where it is very clear that he reached the highest state of intoxication. Mecca, but again according to the biographer, after his 15th year there, he heard a voice from this grocer who was then his sheikh, come back to Egypt and to the sheikh. He immediately left Mecca, went back to Cairo, sought out the sheikh, and he found him on his deathbed. The sheikh told him, gave him a bag of gold, told him to give each piece to each of the people whom he identified as the Abdal, that are those who are going to replace him in the spiritual station that he was, and to fill Muqatta himself. Of that he asked in his final testament to read to the Sheikh. And if you go now to Cairo, there is a small mosque, a small shrine called Jabal Muqatta. It is said that Ibn Farid met with Shahabuddin Sahrawardi, the founder of the Sahrawardi order in Mecca. And it is said also that Shahabuddin Sahrawardi recognized him for what he was, and immediately took station. This is really a short history of Ibn Farid as he came back to Egypt. Having returned back to Egypt, he began to go into public expressions of his ecstatic states. And very, very quickly he began to be recognized by those who sought enlightenment, who sought inner illumination, of being the Shaykh of his time. It is said there are many stories about him, again, about the things he used to do while in a state of spiritual intoxication, the kind of states he used to get into publicly as well as privately. Hearing the adhan, for example, he used to, in some instances, sit down and go into a deep spiritual trance for days on end. And when he did his dhikr, he began to receive such khawatir, such onrushes from the unseen, that he went into fits, days, literally days on end. And these are all witness, days on end where he didn't eat, drink, or do anything except praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In these states, poetry began to overflow from him. And it is true that according to some of his biographers, or those who analyze his poetry, the structure of the poems are so exquisite and delicate that they could not have been, according to them, fashioned by a person who was in this state. But it's quite clear that when he was in these states, poetry used to come out of him while he was lying on his side, standing, reclining, all kinds of positions. And people used to screw him down while he poured out this. Later, it may be later that he rearranged these stanzas, but if one reads them in the original Arabic, there is no doubt that they express the most delicate and refined state of enlightenment and upliftment. And this is when he began to construct his famous poem, the greater poem in letter T, which is also known in Arabic as Nazm al-Suluk, which is the progress of the mystic. And it is probably the most expressive poem that describes the way in which a person reacts to the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as his spiritual state begins to become more and more refined. His biographer says that he saw the Prophet ﷺ in his dreams. And generally those who see the Prophet in their dreams actually see the Prophet in their dreams. But they see him in the way that they can understand. So anybody who has had the great grace and good fortune of witnessing the sense of the Prophet ﷺ in his dreams should not deny that. This is, I think, when he's revealed to a person in his dreams, cannot be but the Prophet, because everything else is not possible. His perfection in his command. He was planning to call this poem the Nafa'is al-Janan, which is the spiritual winds from the gardens. In his dream, the Prophet ﷺ dream told him to change it to Nazm al-Suluk. He is known also as a great believer in and a great defender of the practice of sama', which is audition. Before, about the ambiguity of music and whether music in its rhythmic sense is something that is acceptable within the bounds of the Sharia. Some of the schools of Islam, especially the Hanafi, other form of guys, is not necessarily haram. He and generally the Sufi schools, Sufi culture, accept that music in the form of sama', that is, music or rhythmic sound or rhythmic praise, in order to enhance one's spiritual state, to allow one to accept the onrushes that might come, are something that is quite acceptable. And in fact, it depends on the quality of the hearer, whether the hearer or the listener is listening in order to enhance his hal, that is his then state, or is listening in order to reflect the divine name of Al-Samir, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is or sama', the practice of audition, the practice of using instruments, musical instruments, in and of itself has been condoned by the great master, accepted also in the mainstream of the. It was much more touch and go affair. So his and his way that he comported himself, the way that he reflected the divineness that came upon him as a result of the onrushes that came to him, managed to convince others who are on the skeptical side to accept the practice of sama. And audition from that point of view became an accepted feature within all major orders and major tariqas. The poems that I would like to discuss today are two. One of them is a poem called Khamriya, or the Wine Song. And the other one is the Mystic's Progress, but it's too long, so I've chosen certain extracts from it that will at least give you the sense of what the whole poem is about. The poem has been translated by Nicholson. In not a bad translation, but in slightly archaic English, I would say 19th century English. That is not very easy for the modern. It has the flow, and to some extent it's quite real and reliable in terms of its reflection of what I'm trying to say. One of the lines that have been used by many people to the possibility that Ibn Farid might have met Ibn Arabi is the line that comes from one of his poems called Shaykh al-Arhan, and it's translated as, "O camel driver crossing the wilderness with thy howdahs." Howdahs are the are put on top of camels, which usually carry people. And behold, beside the hills of Taif. Now, Taif is an Arab tribe, and Ibn Arabi was known as Ibn Arabi al-Ta'i, from the tribe of Taif. And the way that sentence is constructed is such that it can only allude to a great man from the tribe of Taif. So this may be a reflection of the possibility that Ibn Farid might have met Ibn Arabi, because the structures of his poems, as I said earlier, is so infused with the spirit of Ibn Arabi, and the structure of the knowledge embodied in, for example, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, that it is quite possible from that perspective that they may have met. The first poem that I would like to read out to you is to the winemaker, and starts in Arabic by شربنا على ذكر الحبيب مدامة سكرنا بها من قبل أن يخلق الكرم. Now this is translated as follows: in memory of the beloved, we quaffed a vintage that made us drunk before the creation of the vine. Now the reflection is quite clear that it does not allude to wine in the physical sense. And I repeat, in memory of the beloved, we quaffed a vintage that made us drunk before the creation of the vine. Wine, as we said last time, is the stuff of divine knowledge when it comes in terms of supporting with the knowledge that is potentially within us, the knowledge that leads us. Cup the full moon, itself a sun which a new moon causes to circle. When it is mingled with water, how many stars appear? The moon has always been used again in Sufi poetry as an allusion and as an indication of the Prophet ﷺ. And the notion of the full moon that is reflecting the light of the splendor of the sun is that, and the splendor of the sun and illumination that comes from the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and nur, the light. But for its perfume, I should not have found the way to its taverns, and but for its resplendence, the imagination would not have pictured it. Time has preserved of it but a breath. It is unseen as a thing hidden in the bosom of the mind. If it be mentioned amongst the tribe, that is the tribe of those of Ahlullah, he's talking about those on the way, those on the path. The tribesmen become intoxicated without incurring disgrace or committing sin. That is, those who are offered the wine that is the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and become drunk with the sight, the mushahada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are not committing a sin in the sense that they are drinking something or imbibing something that is forbidden. It oozed up from the inmost depths of the jars and vanished, and in reality nothing was left of it but a name. If it ever come into the mind of a man, joy will abide with him and grief will journey away. That is, if we receive the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and are able to elevate ourselves, and elevate and refine our nafs, we would have all grief, all sense of distress disappear and vanish. The boon companions beheld the sealing of his vessel. That sealing would have inebriated them without their tasting the wine. And had they sprinkled with it the earth of a dead man's grave, his spirit would have returned to him and his body would have risen. And had they laid down in the shadow of the world where its vine grows, a man sick unto death, his malady would have departed from him. And had they brought to its taverns one palsy, he would have walked, and at the mention of its flavor, the dumb would speak. And had the breath of its aroma floated through the east, and were there in the west one that had lost the sense of smell, he would have regained it. And had the palm of one touching its cup been stained red thereby, he would not have gone astray at night, the lodestar being in his hand. And had it been unveiled a secret to one blind from birth, he would have become seeing, and at the sound of its strainer, the deaf would hear. And had a party of camel riders set out for the soil that bore it, and were there amongst them one bitten by a snake, the venom would not have harmed it. And had the sorcerer inscribed the letters of its name on the brow of one smitten with madness, the writing would have cured him. And had its name been blazoned on the banner of the host, that blazon would have intoxicated those beneath the banner. It corrects the natures of the boon companions, so that those who lack resolution are led by it to the path of resolution. And he whose hand was a stranger to munificence shows himself generous, and he who had no forbearance forbears in the hour of wrath. Had the dullest witted man in the tribe kissed its fidam, his kissing it would have imbued him with the real inwardness of the wine's qualities. They say to me, describe it, for thou art acquainted with its description. Yes, well do I know its attributes. Pure, but not as water. Subtle, but not as air. Luminous, but not as fire. Spirit, but not joined to a body. The divine discourse concerning it was eternally prior to all existing things, where is no form, nor any external trace. And therefore all the things came into being because of a divine providence, whereby it was veiled from everyone that lacks understanding. And my spirit was enamored of it, in such wise that they, my spirit and the wine, were mingled together and made one, not as a body pervades a body. There is a wine without a wine, when Adam is a father to me. There is a vine without a wine, when its mother is a mother to me. The essential subtlety of the vessels, that is, when he talks about vessels, he means the forms, depends in truth on the subtlety of the realities, and by means of the vessels, the realities increase. After division has occurred, so that while the whole is one, our spirits are a wine, and our bodies are a vine. Before it is no before, and after it is no after, it is the before of every after, by the necessity of its nature. Its grapes were pressed in the wine press before time began, and it was an orphan, although the epic of our father Adam came after it. Such are the beauties that lead its praisers to laud it, and beautiful is their prose and verse in its honor. And he that knows it not throws at the mention of it, like the lover of Nu'm when her name was spoken. They said, thou hast drunk the draught of sin. No, I have only drunk what, in my judgment, was the greatest sin to renounce. Health to the people of the Christian monastery. How often were they intoxicated by it without having drunk thereof? Still they aspire. In me, before I was born, it stirred a transport that abides with me forever, though my bones decay. Take it pure, but if thou wish to temper it, the worst wrong is your turning aside from the water of the beloved's teeth. Seek it in the tavern, and there to the accompaniment of tuneful notes, bid it display itself, for by means of music it is made a prize. Wine never dealt with care in any place, even as sorrow never dwelt with song. And though your intoxication with it have but the life of a moment, you will regard time as a slave obedient to your command. Joyless in this world is he that lives sober, and he that dies not drunk will miss the path of wisdom, let him weep for himself, he whose life is wasted without part or lot in mind. This is really the famous Khamriya, and it's, in Arabic it is really beautiful. And a lot of the poems of Ibn Farad have been used in certain circles of dhikr, have been put to a very subtle tune, and have helped many people in arousing their singer by the name of, she passed away about 15 years ago, Kalpoon, early days, used to chant a lot of the poems of very melodious and uplifting tunes by some other poem, which is his most famous one. As I said, there's Nazm al-Suluk, which is the poem of the mystic's progress, but it's in 761 stanzas. And I tried to divide it into certain sections as to what it relates to. And basically it can be divided, and various stanzas can be grouped together to show the way that the mystic progresses. The poem is addressed to a person, so it is meant for an adept, inshallah, people like us, to be able to read it and make use of it. The first 1 to 7 stanzas, the poet recalls a time when his own love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was imperfect, because his sense of intoxication never overcame his sense of self. Then from 8 to 83, he versifies about how he sought and beseeched Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve him from his incomplete love. And he addressed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala usually in the terms of the Arabic love lyric. Sometimes he describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he doesn't describe, but refers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he, sometimes as she, sometimes as the object of desire in famous poems before the date of Islam, like Layla, the name Layla, or Buthaina, or Salma. These are names for love that cannot be completed, cannot be consummated, and it's the heart's desire. From 84 stanza to 102 or 103, the object of his love, answers by accusing him, the poet, of insincerity. Allah Ta'ala tells him that you, in spite of your desires, in spite of your yearnings, you cannot reach me unless yourself is truly immolated. Between the 103 stanzas to 116, Allah Ta'ala graces him with the ability to die before he dies. Mutu qabla an tamutu. Then he goes on to remembers the time. His self, in the process of refinement, begins to remember the time of the primordial covenant. At creation, when the spirits gave their allegiance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognized him as their Lord. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then accepts the yearning of the seeker because he has eliminated himself and does not expect any merit or any reward for his self-destruction. Then he exhorts the disciple or the adept to whom he's addressing the poem to get himself to embark on the path, and that the path is the way by which the self, purifying by the self, resonating more and more truly the sounds of the divine, is able then to overcome its sense of self and be able to be in a state of. He goes on to describe the various stages, including the stages of recognizing the manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every form, without accepting the possibility of hulul, which is the incarnation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also to describe the possibility of reaching the divine station, and how the absolute transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the final analysis, will consummate whatever the mystic believes he has achieved. And the union you achieve is simply ephemeral because of the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no ittihad possible. Allah is the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he has a whole section on that. And then he describes a certain structures of what he thinks is a cosmic order, in terms that are very, very familiar to those who may have read or may have gone through the system of the great Ibn Arabi. That section which deals with creation as being merely a shadow of the true reality, the only reality, which is the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this comes towards the end of the great poem, the Nazm al-Sufi. He says, what comes? He's now referring to the disciple who has reached a sense of, through the cycle of fana, and is now in a cycle of baqa. The insan al-kamil, the perfect man, is being able to see with the sight of Allah, is able to hear with the hearing of Allah, is able to relate all his faculties to the divine attributes. It comes that now thou laughest in glee. Lo, from behind the veil mysterious, the form of things are shown in every guise. Of manifold appearance, and in them an all-wise providence has joined what stands. Opposed in nature, mute they utter speech, inert they move, and void of splendor shine. And so it comes that now we laugh in glee, then weep anon like mother over a dead child. And mournest if they sigh for pleasure lost, and tremble if they sing with music's joy. Birds warbling on the boughs delight your ear, the while their sweet notes sadden thee within. Thou wonderest at their voices and their words, expressive, unintelligible tongues. Of lands the camels cross the wilderness, at sea the ships run swiftly through the deep, and you behold two armies, one on land, on sea another, multitudes of men, clad for their bravery in iron mail, and fenced about with points of sword and spear. The land troops march on horseback or on foot, bold cavaliers and stubborn infantry. The warriors of the sea, some mount on deck, some climb the masts like lances straight and tall. Here in assault they smite with gleaming swords. They are thrust with tough brown shafts of quivering spears, part browned with fire of arrows shot in showers, part burned with floods of steel that pierce like flames. These rushing onward, offering their lives, those reeling broken beneath the shame of rout, and catapult you see hurling stones against strong fortresses and citadels, to ruin them, an apparition strange of naked viewless spirits thou mayest spy, that wear no friendly shape of humankind. For genies love not men, and in the stream the fisher casts his net and blows for fish, and craftily the fowler sets a snare, that hungry birds may fall in it for corn, and ravening monsters wreck the ships at sea, and lions in the jungle rend their prey, and in the air some birds, and in the wild some animals hunt others, and you see many a form besides, whose names I pass, putting my trust in samples choice, no few. Regard now what is this that lingers not, before your eye and in a moment fades. All thou beholdest is the act of one, in solitude, but closely veiled is he. Let him but lift the screen, no doubt remains. The forms are vanished, he alone is all. And you, lumen, knowest that by his light thou findest his actions in the senses night. This is really the penultimate section of the Ta'iyyah. And a person who has climbed up the various ladders of ascent back to the divine is able to recognize that all is Allah, that all is one, and that Tawheed in its true sense is the ingathering of all the forms, of all existent entities, of all intellectualized entities, in all created entities, back into be named Al-Jami', which means the gatherer. This is the true tawheed of a person who has scaled the heights. Any questions or comments? Have you heard of anything from Ibn Farouk? Have you heard of him? Again, as I was saying earlier, that most people associate Rumi because of the way that it's been translated. But stories, pure anecdotes, no allegories. It is really intoxication, pure drowning in the ocean of oneness.